If you are a victim of domestic violence or partner violence, please call your local police department or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. There are resources available to help you and your family. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Lydia Cassady, Part 3.
Have you all had anything to eat? You want to run up to the little diner and we'll get something to eat. And so we went to the little diner there in Stamping Ground and had dinner. And it was all of us. The kids were there and everything. And this was that other kind of creepy, crazy, the whole conversation was almost like how he had been abused as a child. And how his daddy was so awful and how he would, throw himself over his mom. He had many broken ribs because his dad would beat his mother and he would throw himself over his mother to kind of protect her, and how evil his father was and all this kind of, he's kind of just talking about how, oh, woe is me.
Yeah, how bad he had it.
Yeah, how bad it was and how awful. And and so the whole night was kind of that conversation.
Just weird. Like, why are we even talking about this?
Very weird. And I just, Lydia and I always, which was just a big thing, and it's always for my whole family, is, when we say our goodbyes, it's hugs and kisses and I love you. And, it was one of those things that you look back at, and when she walked out that door and we did that, it was just like one of those things that you go, that was kind of an eerie, remembrance of, that's the last time I saw her. So that was the last time I physically saw her. We talked every morning. So I have a 42-minute drive into Lexington. And so I always called her first thing. It was
like me and Angie. I had a long drive to where I go. So, and she did too. So it's that's just what you do when you get in the car.
Yep. And so I would call her every morning. And I remember calling her that next morning on Monday, which was the 3rd, I think, something like that. Like it was like a couple days before she had passed. And I remember going, what was that Twilight Zone? I'm like, what is going on? And she's like, oh, he knows I'm leaving. And I'm like, but all the things that you're doing are contradictory to what you're trying. You had him co-sign on.
Yeah. What did she say? Why she did that?
Well, he said he was going to do it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but I told you Daryl and I would help you go get connected and all the things. And it was just kind of those things. I think he was just trying to get more of the claws in. One more claw.
Yes.
And she was like, and like the week before he'd taken her to Belterra, which of course she's not a gambler, so she never goes gambling. And I don't know if they've ever been to Belterra by themselves like that. And and if you look back at his posts on Facebook, he was doing all these posts where they're like all lovey-dovey and kisses, and which they didn't do that anyways. I mean, it's just so it's so twisted and bizarre. You just look at it and go, oh my gosh, just something else. And so I had talked with her each morning. I talked with her the morning that she died. Every morning we had talked, and I kept saying to her, well, even on one of my texts, Daryl kept saying, she cannot, I feel like Daryl could have written the story, which is, I think, why our grief was so traumatic, is he kept saying, she can't lead him on. He is not right. And he is not one to be fooled with, basically. And so I remember sending her that text one morning saying, look, don't lead him on. He's not right. And she says, I know, ... And so I think that morning, which is odd, they all got up and they all went and worked out at the gym. And they dropped off his truck to get worked on at an auto body shop. And he went on to work. And everybody went to work and school. And he got home, cooked a little dinner, and my nephew comes home and Shirley is there. So Shirley is there on the night that my sister was killed. So she is there, and she and Ken are just talking and kind of laughing.
And Lydia was there at this
moment?
No.
No, she's not home yet. And so they're there, and basically Ken says to my nephew, hey, go get your and your sister's school picture and give them to Shirley. And so it's very pleasantries, exchanges the school pictures. He kisses on the cheek and says, I love you, and she leaves. The reason she was there is she had brought him home from work.
Because the truck's in the shop.
Yep. So soon my sister and my niece arrive. I think everybody eats dinner, and her and Ken go to get the truck from the auto body shop. And this is all about 5:30-ish happening. And so they come back, and I'm not sure. I think there may have been some fighting going on as they were coming back in, because I guess it started at that point. Some fighting ensued, arguments, things like that. I'm thinking we're right around the 6 o'clock time frame at this point. And arguments getting more heated, more elevated. And then at that point, Ken comes into my nephew's room, swings open the door, and says, you get your sister, you get in the truck, and you go to your friend's house. Now, the friend's house is about a block away in the same neighborhood. Reminder, my nephew doesn't have a license, so he's not legally supposed to be driving. Now he's grown up in the country riding and driving, so he can drive.
Why would he not just have them walk if it's a block? Why would you put him in a car?
Yep. But that's what he said. Get in the car and go take your sister. So as, as they're starting to leave and exit the house, which again, we're about a 1,200 square foot home. As they're starting to exit the house, they hear the safe. Ken had 2 60-gun safe units in my nephew's bedroom, and they were loaded up with guns and ammo and silencers and you name it. He was an avid gun collector. He was an avid hunter. My nephew, Ken's older boys are also hunters, so they had lots of guns. And so they had heard the safe open. So I think at that point they thought, oh my gosh, this is not good. They left. I think they even drove maybe around the block, but they were told to do something, and they were going to do it because you did not do what Daddy said. And so they went to the friend's house. They were at the friend's house for less than 5 to 10 minutes. I mean, literally 5 to 10 minutes. And then he called my niece and said, you need to go down to Aunt Cece's and Uncle Daryl's and spend the night.
Ken called his daughter and said, go to your house.
Yep. You need to go down there. And I think maybe he may even said, let him know we're fighting or something like that. Basically, that's why you need to go.
Yeah.
So, as they're leaving, they kind of pass one of the older boys in the midst, which I think Ken had reached out to him to come over.
Ken's older boy.
Yeah. Well, not the oldest, but the next older. And had reached out to him to come over. And basically I think my niece said it was to calm the situation down or whatever it may be. So I think I got the call at about anywhere around 6:50, 7 o'clock, 7:15, somewhere around there, from my niece who's on Nicholasville Road, and they're on their way to my house. And it was, Daddy's sending us to you. They're fighting. And, it's just like, what?
So that hadn't happened before.
No.
Yeah.
Now, again, they are like right around those last couple months, there was a lot of arguments and fussing and fighting and stuff like that.
But nobody was sent to your
But
house.
nobody's ever been sent to the house like that. So that was, I was like, okay, do we need to call the police? And my husband's sitting over here going, yes, we need to call the police. And, you look at things and you just go, we should have done what my husband said, right then and there. And about that same time that we're kind of having this debate on that is, a friend of a friend had called because she was good friends with Lydia. And she's like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? And because she knew that my niece had reached out to them. And she's like, well, do you think we should call the police? And I'm thinking, both my husband's like, yes, we should call. I mean, like, he's like, yes, we should call the police. And so she's like, well, if we call the police, we'll never see these kids or Lydia again, basically. And she said, well, kind of worked it out where, hey, a friend of a friend was going to make a call. Basically, was what was going to happen. So that's how we went to bed, thinking
somebody's going to anonymously call or just say, I've heard this.
Hey, do a welfare check kind of thing. And I had texted her and said, give me a call. And she didn't give me a call, which was not uncommon for her not, especially when he's around.
God, that's so much like Angie.
You don't call. Like when he's not around.
You can, and she'll answer.
Absolutely.
I had texted her that evening as well. Yeah. And she didn't answer me back. And I told him, I said, she's not answering probably because he's home tonight.
Yeah.
And, and so that's so bizarre that same thing happened. But then you just think, I'll talk to her in the morning when he's gone to work or when she can get away from him on her way to work.
Yeah. And about that time he had changed. Now, again, we didn't know this until after everything's done, but about that time he'd changed his Facebook profile picture to a really ugly picture of, I don't even know what the picture is, like a wolf holding on to the back of a woman's pants as she's running away. Kind of, it's really twisted. And also he had posted a video that's been since taken down for like bad content or whatever. But it was a video of like a pot boiling and like pressure, like psh, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he'd posted that. And it was kind of like these people dancing around in this pot and the pot explodes kind of thing. And I remember seeing on that, like one of his buddies or something had like commented on it and going like, Ken ? Like what's like, it was just a really sicko kind of it. But again, this was after we knew what had happened. And he was notorious for changing his name a lot on Facebook. So he was never really Ken Strange. He was only that for a little while. And then it was Larry Doran, which was my mother's maiden name. And then his last, if you ever want to check out his name, was like Larry Cassady. Just weird.
Why would he do that?
I just think there was a lot going on. He had a lot going on, whether it be the other ladies or things that were going on.
But wasn't he thinking?
Right. You just don't know.
He could have been frauding people. He could have been in debt
But
with people.
was he not thinking by posting pictures of he and Lydia, these other ladies are going to see he's got someone?
Well, you wouldn't know because you wouldn't know his name. Because he changed his name. So you wouldn't be you couldn't find him. If you're looking for Ken Strange on Facebook, you're not going to see him. Yeah. It's going to be a weirdo name that only his closest people know. Right. So, yeah.
So the children make it to your house.
They make it to our house. We all go to bed with the intent of, because I'm a little irritated by the whole thing too, which, again, in hindsight, you're like, and he did call my niece when they got to my house. Cause again, they had 360 on their phones, which is the tracking app. So he knew that she and my nephew had arrived. And I think he even called maybe to say, okay, you're there, kind of love you. And that was it. And so we went to bed that night and I had told the kids, I'm like, well, what time does your bus come? Okay, I'll get you home in time to shower and jump on the bus. And so we got up early that next morning. We are probably 10 minutes out heading towards Nicholasville. We're 10 minutes out and my niece receives a call from the next oldest son. And the call is kind of, well, where are you headed? What are you doing? Kind of what you doing? And she's basically, well, Aunt Cece's bringing me back to the house, us to the house so we can get showers and get on the bus. And he's like, well, I need to talk to Aunt Cece. And so I get the phone and I said, hello. And he said, what do you do? He asked me this kind of the same question. What are you doing? And I said, well, I'm headed back to Nicholasville and drop the kids off so they can get showers and get on the bus and go to school. They got to go to school. And I said, well, where's like Lydia and Ken? And he said, they're gone. And I said, what do you mean they're gone? I said, I got their kids. What do you mean they're gone? Because I was really aggravated at that point. I'm like, how are you gone?
Yeah,
where
did you even go?
Like, yeah. And he said, no, Carolyn. He said, she's dead and he's gone. And I was like, what? And I mean, of course, I've got the kids in the car. So it was like, what do you even do with that information? I mean, I was like, literally, I was like panic. I was like, I think I was screaming and yelling
for a second.
Yep. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What is happening? Like, and I'm like, what are the police doing? Where are the police? And he's like, I've not called in my life. And then that, of course, put me over the edge. I'm like, get off the phone, call the police, and I'll be there as soon as I can. And so I'm whipping my car back around. I call my husband. He's like, get right back here, because he's getting ready to take my 8-year-old to school. So I'm having to call a dear friend to come get him to, of course,
so
get
Daryl
him to
can
school
go with you all.
so he can drive me and the kids. And I think the whole while there, I had this kind of thought that, okay, great. He shot her. She's fine. Like, paramedics are with her.
Yeah.
We're good to go. Like, I mean, I was in trance. Like, it was like
that little bit of hope.
But the hope. And then when we pulled up and you see the coroner van sitting
And did you
there,
tell the kids while you were driving
what's
going on?
Yeah. I mean, they were like right there through the whole thing. And so, and they're good kids, and it's just awful. It's so traumatic. But so we get to the house and there's, the coroner's there, 3 or 4 cop car are there. We get out, go to the corner, and out comes the, it was one of the cops, I think. And I think it was Cassie from Michael's office at the coroner's, Cassie Robinson, who's, gosh, just
amazing,
biggest
isn't
cheerleader. She? Yep. And Michael's.
Yes.
But I think it was the two of them, a cop, and the first thing they said was, the paramedics are with her.
So you're thinking.
So I'm like, that was my first thought is,
it's going to be okay.
And then the next thing out of their mouth is, you know that your sister's deceased, that she's passed.
And then the confusion, but you said the paramedic is there.
Yeah. And so it was like those two things is like, and of course, then at that point it was, I mean, you can't go in and do anything because it's obviously an active crime scene at that point. And then it is come down to the office and, let's talk through questions. So that's so we ended up at Jessamine Police for a while, probably for a couple hours actually, where they just walked through questions. So basically, the next oldest son, not the oldest, but the one above my nephew, was the one who found her. So they had him in there for questioning as well. And then after our questioning, we were to go and kind of talk with the coroner's office also. And
I'm sure the next older boy, he was probably trying to call his dad, I'm guessing, like, where are you?
I'm not sure. I mean, he was on the run at that point. So he had, they had security cameras in the house. He had crushed those, taken the main box, crushed her phone, left his phone, and he'd gone on the run at that point. And so that was part of the questions was, where do we think he will go? And actually my niece was, just super intuitive. She said the first thing out of her mouth was, he'll go to Shirley's. And so that's in Frankfort. And he doesn't like this cold weather. He won't stay around here. He'll probably go down south back to Florida. And the lieutenant at the time had asked me, do they have a frequent place they go to in Florida? I said, well, they've been down there several times. I said, but probably his favorite is Venice Beach. So, and that's actually, he was found about an hour outside in Lake Wales. So
at this time, when your niece said Shirley's, I guess, did they start people headed towards Shirley's hoping that he's still there?
Yep. That afternoon by noon, they had sent people to Shirley's house. And when they got there, Ken had switched trucks. He'd taken the brand new truck, which was a big black Dodge Ram, very, very distinct. And he'd switched that with, I believe she was in a black Jeep. like a little,
renegade, I think is what the news said.
And so
So they were driving Shirley's vehicle.
Yep. And I think he had ditched her cell phone in the yard. I'm not quite clear on that. And then I think he took her. How he took her, I don't know. I don't know if she went of her free will. According to all the things you see, she didn't. But I think her and her dog went along for this, whatever this was, right? And so, for about, that happened on the 4th, her death that evening, she was found on the 5th, right? So then there was all these days of we don't know where this man's at.
Yeah, about how many days are we talking that you all
I think
are wondering?
Was 4 or 5.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, 4 or 5. I think he died on the 9th.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she actually physically died on the 4th. So really about 5 days he had on the road.
So during this time, people are just looking for him and her.
That's right.
It was all over the news and social media. I think the Nicholasville
police I
was
recall seeing news saying if you've seen this person.
Yeah, he was all over the news. Yeah. In fact, one of the news folks had reached out from one of the channels and said, hey, you want to do an interview? And I basically said, no. I said, the saving grace that I have is, one, we don't know where this man is. He's threatened before to kill the whole family. I mean, he's threatened the kids before. He's threatened Lydia before. I have his children, and I'm not going to do anything to jeopardize.
Yeah, because I imagine you're probably thinking he could show up here to get his kids back.
Yeah, we were on, my husband is an avid gun collector and an avid hunter. And we were like, he had us completely like on lockdown. We have security cameras and all the things on the windows and doors and all the stuff. But we had guns in different places. We had a kind of an exit plan, a safety plan put in place for those days. We had constant Scott County Sheriff deputies patrolling our area. And then we had, I don't know how much you know about country neighbors, but they're very protective. Mm-hmm. And so we had, country neighbors that were constantly checking on us, and the phone was just ringing off the hook from people just making sure, everybody was okay.
Yeah, I can't imagine the terror you must have thought. We're going to go to bed and he's going to bust out one of our windows getting in here.
Well, and, one of the biggest things for me was, has he rethought this? You have my kids now. Give me my kids back. Right. That was my biggest fear, was he was coming for his
he's coming to get his kids.
And whatever stands in his way,
you'll go too.
Yeah. And and that's what we had told everybody, including the kids. He walks in this door.
Got to shoot him. You got to protect yourselves.
Yeah. And, it was a very scary few days. Yeah.
Very real few days for sure.
Well, and then there was that point of, both my husband and my brother, who's an attorney in Louisville, both were like, they're either probably going to kill him or he's going to kill himself. Yeah. One of those two things are going to happen. And, my brother kept going, that may be the best, because again, do you want kids reliving all this? Do you need to rehash all this? And what if he gets off with, 5 years down the road or something? So, but it was just a sad situation because, again, we were blessed with him sending them to us. But now you've got 2 children who've, their mother's been murdered. Their father's just shot himself.
Well, so before that, you're all just waiting days thinking, is he going to call to see if the kids are okay? So these 5 days, how do you find out that he had killed himself? How did that even come to be?
Yeah, we were once he crossed state lines, and they knew he had crossed state lines because once he had crossed state lines, there was a U.S. Marshal. There was a couple U.S. Marshals involved, and that's where all of our communication then went.
So they're looking for him.
At first, it was through the lieutenant and some of the detectives here in Jessamine County. But once he crossed state lines, U.S. Marshals were communicating with us on a daily,
how'd they know?
A couple of days. His the truck that they were driving, which I believe was Shirley's truck, was tagged at a couple of different, whether it be tolls or some type of camera footage caught her truck passing the line. Because at one point they said he had crossed like either Tennessee or something to that, like he'd already gone through one state. And that's when the U.S. Marshal kind of called to introduce himself and say, here's what we're doing. here's what's going on, you know, and we had already, I mean, of course my niece had already told him, hey, he's probably going to Florida. So this was, I mean, he was so predictable, which was really strange because if he'd had any really smarts or wit about him, I mean, he was one of those guys that, you know, was a hunter and a fisher and probably could live off the land and go just disappear. But I mean, he was totally predictable, which was just really odd. And I think it was just because he was just losing it. Yeah.
And a lot of times we always talk about that because when they'll be like, why'd they do that and everything? And I'm like, you know, we got to hope that they're stupid at some point. I mean,
well, and I think that's what it was.
And he's stupid.
Yeah. I mean, if he'd have been smart, I mean, you'd gone out to like Iowa or some like Colorado and just been lost.
He'd have never gone to see Shirley.
Yeah.
I mean, if he really, he's
sure.
smart up. He left the phone behind, but he would have never started that first stupid step.
So he's driving and they're looking, just seeing where they can find him.
They're communicating with us daily, a couple times during the day. And then on that day that he shot himself, the officer said he's committed suicide. So
tell us how that happened, that they approached him or found him for the suicide.
So from what I understand is, again, her vehicle was tagged somewhere crossing that Florida line. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, we had gotten notified that he is in Florida. We know he's in Florida. We now have these local jurisdictions looking for him. And I guess a couple of the jurisdictions right outside of Venice, I think an hour, maybe north, I'm not real sure, but it was like Lake Wales area, had spotted him on the interstate. And so they basically did a kind of a quiet follow. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you call that, but more of, there's not a bunch of marked cars watching him, but there are, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, they watched him until they came to their next stop, which was at a gas station. And he got out, pumped gas, took the dog. He was actually taking the dog for a walk, letting the dog use the bathroom.
And she was in the car?
And she was in the car, from what we understand. And she was in the car, and all was surrounded by multiple police units, guns drawn. And then I think what was said was all you could hear was no, 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 no. And he shot himself.
At the gas station?
At the gas station there. So, and that's in the news media too. You see the pictures. Yeah. And
so what happens with Shirley at that point? I guess they talk with her?
Yeah, I think they brought her back. I think they talked to her there. And then I think, they brought her back for more questioning. And then I think she was released.
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then I guess what happened with him? Did they leave him in Lake Wales, Florida, or did he come back here? Did the kids have a funeral for him?
Yeah. So the older boys brought him back to Jessamine County and had him cremated and had a service for him.
Did the younger two children go to that?
Yeah. I mean, we asked them if they, of course, I mean, this is a real tough situation. What do you do here?
Yeah.
It's,
he killed their mom.
But he's still their dad.
But yes.
That's part of, to me, that's been, of all these things in cases like this, that's part of the evil construct of it.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing. Like I said earlier, the ripple effects are incredible.
Yeah. Well, and anytime you talk, I mean, of course, I had my own trauma counseling there for a little while right after all of this. And, one of the things I think that stood out when she, it's especially children too, right? Doesn't matter what age you are, you kind of compartmentalize, right? Here's the daddy piece of it, and here's the piece that you murdered my mama.
Yeah.
And so that's tough. And obviously it's tough all the way around. I had said to them, whatever you decide to do, I'm okay with. Whatever you need to do. I said, we won't be going, but so I had two of our very best friends took them to the service. They just sat in the back and let them attend the service.
Yeah. They've got years, the rest of their lives that they have to piece this together. So.
Yeah. So, I always tell this story because the day before I was like, God, just give me a sign that this is okay. And, what you hear about red cardinals.
Yeah.
Well, these red cardinals are now in the bush. And I'm like, okay, well, there it is. And so then the next day, his service was due to start at, I think, 5 or 6 o'clock. And I was getting off right at that same time. And I was walking downstairs to leave. And one of my girlfriends from work, she came up to me. She goes, oh, my gosh, Carolyn, I'm so sorry. I wasn't able to attend Lydia's service. Now, this is like right at the same time that his service is getting ready to start. She's like, I'm sorry I didn't get to attend Lydia's service. She said, but I bought you a little something and I wanted to give it to you. And so it's this little box, and it is this little cardinal bracelet.
Oh, how beautiful.
And I just lost it. And I mean, I couldn't even talk to her. I couldn't even tell her why I was losing it, because I literally just lost it. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a sign, you know? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think that later that night or the next morning, I texted her and I said, let me explain why that was so emotional and meant so much. Yeah. But, you know, it was like one of those things that you're just like, okay, that's kind of creepy, but a good sign. You know, I think it was just one of those things to say, it's okay. It's going to be okay. You got to get through it. So
do the 2 younger children have contact with the 2 older children still?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not as, you know, I think before Ken's death, his oldest son and he were a little bit estranged. So they hadn't spoken for a couple of years. Like the kids hadn't been a part of their lives because Ken was mad at him. Ken was so mad at him that, you know, I think at Christmas, I believe it was at Christmas, he even told my husband, I'm going to kill, like, I'd just kill him or something like that, talking about his oldest son. And Daryl was like, buddy, that's your son. I mean, you gotta get past, like, that's your son. And so, and then I think even the weekend before Lydia died, they were in Bath and Body, and the oldest, and I think his family may have been there too, but was there. And I think Ken and him had words to the point that Ken was almost like, I'm going to shoot you right here, or something, like almost like to draw his gun or something, you know, because he always carried. And I think, you know, because his oldest son's a big guy, and I think his oldest son, you know, hey, you do that, and I'm like, you eat it, kind of thing. But it was to the point I think they were going to press charges, you know, even on him.
Wow.
But I don't think that happened because of everything else that had, you know, again, all that happened right around the same time. So, but yeah.
Wow. That is crazy.
It's a lot, but thank you for being so articulate with it.
Yes.
It's got to be tough to talk about. So thanks again for that.
Well, what has life been like since then? You have the children.
Yep. We have the children.
And do you all, did the children get to go see Lydia's grave, or did you all have her cremated? Is she with you?
We actually had her buried in the little town that we live in, right in northern Scott County. And we actually drive by her. You can see her grave every day we drive by. So we wanted her close.
Yeah.
So we buried her close, and, you know, just did a really nice headstone and stuff with a picture of her on it. Yeah. And we always try to be out there holiday-ish and put some little holiday, because she would want that little creativity on her grave. And we've got some lights set up so at night you can kind of see it's more distinct than most of the others. So yeah, she's real close. She's less than 5 minutes from us.
Wow. So the children can go.
Oh yeah.
Who took Ken's ashes?
The second son? I'm assuming his kids. Yeah. We don't know anything about that.
Wow. Do the children talk much about it, or is it kind of just not talked about?
Yeah. I mean, we talk about, we try to always keep Lydia in the forefront of our memories. And, you know, well, Mama did this, or, you know, I'll say, well, I mean, we were at a ball game and there's this bumblebee, what looks like a bumblebee. It's actually a wood-bee, but it's like right at my head. It won't. And then it comes over to my nephew's head. And I'm like, well, there's Mama. She's not going to leave us alone tonight. You know, so we're always trying to keep her memory alive and trying to do things, you know, in memory of her, and just kind of keep her memories alive. Cause I mean, you know, she was a great person.
It sounds like it. Tragically.
I think she was just in a tough situation.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think just, you know, part of it is, I think the communication and what to do, when to do it. I think we were, you know, it's like too late. You know?
Yeah. And I think, like I say in that video, I'd ask you if you'd seen, we did a YouTube promotional a year after Angie's death where we went to the cemetery. And in that video, I say, and it's actually playing right now, I say on there, when those victims utter those words, it's over, I'm done, that is the most deadly time for them.
It is.
And I can't imagine being in that position they're in. You don't know whether you should sneak out while they're at work.
Yep.
Do you face the beast and say, I'm done. You're not going to do this anymore.
Yep.
Because they work up that courage, and then that ends up being the death of them. And then you can only imagine what those last seconds were like. Did they realize this is getting ready to happen? Or was she, like, I can imagine, and this is only my imagination, I can imagine Angie was probably being pretty mouthy there at the very end, because she was always pretty mouthy.
Done.
I think she said, get your crap and get out.
Yes.
Yep.
And he went back to get his crap, and that's when he came back with a gun.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. And I just wonder if Lydia was the same. This is it. I'm done. You've sent my kids. Let's get to the bottom of this. Now my kids aren't here.
Yeah. Well, and I think she was at that moment. I think the arguments were starting to, like, she wasn't an arguer up until that point, up until those last few weeks. I mean, she never mouthed back at him. I mean, she did there at Thanksgiving. And so I feel like that just got, that momentum with her got even more of being confident and, I'm out. I'm getting out. I'm out of this. Like, I mean, we'd even told her she could come live with us. But I mean, one of the things that we said is, I mean, I even told her, I'm like, Daryl won't put up with him. Like, you've got to be done. If you're done, you can come here. But if you're not done, we're not going to put up with him back and forth
coming to
here.
visit.
Nope. That's not going to happen. And her thing was she wanted to do it her way. You know, she wanted to do it in her time, her way. And, you know, I think there at the end, I mean, you know, based on the autopsy. And, you know, I think at first, you know, the coroner had thought that she was shot from behind. And I think that was one of our things for me anyways. It was like my saving grace going, oh, she never knew this was coming. Like, he just came from behind and killed her. So that was one of those things that kind of, it's awful to say that gave me comfort, but it gave me comfort.
You were thinking at least she didn't know.
Yeah. But that's not ultimately what happened. And, you know, when Michael, the coroner's office, took her body to Frankfurt, and Cassie stayed with her the whole time, and they did the actual autopsy to really find out. There was a lot of questions that day. There was a Pandora ring box and a Pandora bag. No ring found. And that was supposedly the ring that he wanted to marry her with, kind of thing. And Cassie kept asking me from the coroner's office, she kept asking me, you know, Carolyn, you know anything about the fingers and her ring fingers and things like that? And I kept going, no, what do you mean? And she's like, well, her fingers were broken.
Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your play to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.